Children, this week we have a special, it's a special week in the life of the church. Can you help me with some numbers? Do you guys know your numbers? Some of you know your numbers? So, Jesus rose from the dead. Can everyone put up 3 fingers? 3 days after he died. He rose on the 3rd day. Can everyone say on the 3rd day? On the 3rd day. So on the 3rd day, Jesus rose from the dead. And Jesus was with his disciples for how long before 40 days? Can everyone say 40 days? 40 days. He showed himself and he was with his disciples teaching and preaching to them. 40 days. And, however, 40 days after Jesus rose from the dead, he took his disciples out to Bethany on a mountain. And he blessed them. Can you put your hands out? He blessed them. Okay, he blessed them. And then he gave his commands to them to go into all the world to preach the gospel. And then all of a sudden something happened. Jesus, who was with them for 3 years, well, he was with them for 33 years. Jesus was 33 years old. All of a sudden they were around Jesus and he began to ascend into heaven. I think that would have been an amazing thing to see, right? Jesus ascended into heaven, right? And all of a sudden, there was a cloud. That cloud was like the pillar of cloud in the Old Testament, and it went over where Jesus was, and they could see him no longer. Jesus is still with us. He said, "Lo, I will be with you always." He's still with us in his flesh and blood in Holy Communion. And he says, "Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst." So Jesus is still with us with his bodily presence, but we can no longer what? See it with our eyes. And we wait in order for Jesus to come back until we see him again. Edie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I actually have watched a movie of Jesus' whole life called Jesus, and I also last night I watched Prince of Egypt.
Oh, that's nice. Prince of Egypt and the life of Jesus. Yeah, very good. Well, maybe you remember some of these things because you saw it in the movie. Now, when the disciples were looking up into heaven, can everyone look up into heaven? When the disciples were looking up into heaven, the angels came by Jesus. They came by Jesus and they said, "Men of Galilee, why are you still gazing into heaven? This same Jesus who ascended into heaven will also what? Come back in the same way." And so one of the things that we say in our Apostles' Creed that you memorize, we say, the 3rd day he rose again from the what?
Dead.
He ascended into and sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he will what? Come to judge the living and the dead. So in our lives, we're waiting for Jesus to what? He's sitting at God's right hand. He's ruling all things for the sake of his church. But we're waiting for him to what? To return. And the dead will be raised, and all sin and death will be done away with, and will be with the Lord forever. And so that's the one thing that we're waiting for, is our Lord's return. Let's close with Luther's morning prayer. I thank you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have kept me this night from all harm and danger. And I pray that you would keep me this day also from sin and every evil, that all my doings in life may please you. For into your hands I commend myself, my body and soul, and all things. Let your holy angel be with me, that the evil foe may have no power over me. Amen. On Thursday, we're celebrating the Ascension at church, a special service at 7 p.m. And guess what we're having afterwards? Ice cream. Yeah, you guys, you should tell your parents that you want to come to church for the Ascension and ice cream. All right. Have a good day at class, guys. Just a spoonful of sugar. Sorry. Anyways, Good. We're in Leviticus 23, and look it up in your phone or look it up in a Bible. We've got some over there. We're in the ESV for those of you who are looking online. Some of the Bibles here, wherever they are ESV. Some of them are different versions. Anything before we begin with Leviticus 23 in particular? Make sure to thank Eric for his work taking out some of the dividers. Yes, look at that. And in addition, when I write on one of the boards, you'll actually be able to what? See it if you're over here, which is wonderful. I have new access to these boards, and looking forward to probably using that today, and hopefully most of you will be able to see it. Anything else that you have today? Please.
When you mentioned John 3:16 and then the text around it in the sermon, it struck me that that's so stupid, but Jesus is actually saying these words about himself in the past tense.
Okay.
Pastor, can you repeat?
Yeah.
That's not a question.
Deanna is just making an observation that in John 3:16, Jesus speaks about himself in past tense. I think that would maybe warrant a Bible study at some point in time. When, John 3:16 is one of the most famous verses in the Bible, and when John 3:16 is spoken, Deanna is saying, well, why is it then in past tense? For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world may be saved through him. All I will say is this. Sometimes in the Bible, especially in the Gospel of John, especially in this section, it's hard to determine what are the words of Jesus and what are the words of John, the narrator. So while my words, chapters, have the quote there, for God so loved the world, do any of you have your version in red?
Yeah.
What does it do with that?
It's red.
It puts it in red. I think there's some question whether or not this is the preaching of John or these are the works of Jesus. So the words of Jesus. So I'll leave it at that and say, at this point in time, I haven't studied enough to give you a firm answer, but it would be interesting if these are the words of Jesus, not just the preaching of John, that, it's in past tense. But, the giving, the word give, I think if we looked at the Gospel of John, happens in different ways, right? God gave his Son, into the flesh in the incarnation. He gives his Son on the cross, and he continues to give his Son in the Word and Sacrament. So the question is maybe the gave focuses our attention on all the efforts of God to give his Son to us. All right, anything else?
Actually say his death.
It does not say gave as far as his death, though the context, as I mentioned this morning in verse 14, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. So Jesus says those words, and that is, you put your finger on probably an argument why possibly these are the words of John kind of preaching to us about what Jesus was just saying in the past tense. All right, anything else? I'm skipping a chapter in Leviticus. If you're noting our progression through the book, I felt that 22 was concepts that we dealt with before. So I wanted to get to the last section of Leviticus. It's all the way to 27. And 23 to 26, by and large, deals with time. So we're going to talk today about holy time. And I want to make a few comments on this before we go on. So first of all, 23 deals with holy time, and 25 especially deals with holy time with the year of Jubilee. That'll be interesting to discuss that. And so we do enter a section here that deals with our days and how they're numbered by God's Word. So just an item for thought here. Where did they receive these words? Let's just kind of rehearse in our mind briefly. Where did they receive the book of Leviticus and the legislation in Leviticus? Where were they? It's easy to get kind of lost in the forest because we've been through so much. But where were they specifically when they received the legislations of this book? Any comments?
Were they in the wilderness or in the foot of Sinai?
Okay, they were not in the wilderness, although the ongoing teaching would have happened in the wilderness. But the first place that they would have received this, or Moses received this, was at the foot of Sinai. So it's helpful to recognize that while we've been through 22 chapters, we really haven't gotten anywhere, in the sense that we're still where? At the foot of Sinai, at how their life is going to be ordered in the future. So understanding this, let's recognize the next point. How many days, approximately, after, how many days before had they been slaves? Yeah, just days, but about how many? The Bible does say that. Does anybody know this? How long did it take them to go from, Passover to specifically Mount Sinai? How long did it take them to get a group of about 1.5 million people? Any thoughts? Throw it out there. Okay, so yeah, it seems like 40, except add 10 to that. Well, the Bible says in the second month. So in the second month can mean a latitude there. But traditionally the Jews, and I'll get to this later, just tuck this away later, they believed or they celebrated it 50 days later. So Passover was celebrated, and then 50 days later they had another festival that they celebrated. Just as an aside, because we're playing Bible Jeopardy, as it were, what festival did they celebrate? We'll get to it today because we're talking about holy time. What festival did they celebrate 50 days later? Pentecost. The word penta comes from the word what? 50 days. So the point is, how well did they remember their life as slaves? Yeah, pretty well, okay? Okay. And what is your life as a slave marked by? Repetition, I like that word. What else? Hardship, suffering, work, labor. How many days off a week do you get as a slave? Okay? All right. Probably what? If the master wants you to do something, you're going to do it. I'd be interested to study more if the Egyptians allowed the Israelites their Sabbath day, but I know of no Bible passage that speaks to the fact that they, as slaves, had a day off. So God had commanded them to have a day off in the Sabbath, but they could never take it because they were what? And as a slave, your life is just merely about the taskmaster and the whip. So imagine getting to Mount Sinai, remembering your whole life as slaves, and God saying to you what? I want you to take a what? A break. Your whole life now is not ordered by what? Work. You're not slaves. You are now a If you have days off, it's a mark of a what? A free people. He had freed them from what? Slavery, which meant that their lives were no longer just about what? Labor. And what are days off, especially with if slavery is a mark of toil, burdensome labor, day in and day out, monotony. What is the life of a free person like? What would you say, having days off, what are those days for? What's the purpose of them? Okay, I like this word, rest, that God would give us what? Rest. Thank you. But God, we are not just bodies, we're also souls, right? We're body and spirit together as humans. So God aims not only to give our bodies rest, but also even more what? Our spirits rest. As a pastor, my favorite time off, you ever say this, like after your vacation, I need a vacation from my vacation, right? Everybody says that. My favorite vacations aren't actually just ceasing from work. They're vacations where I, as a pastor, go for a week and study something underneath a professor, because it's like two things, right? It's not just what? It's not just rest for the body, it's also rest for the soul and the spirit, as God recharges us with His Word. I like to say rest for the soul is like being able to breathe again. The burden of sin that's on our back, God releases us from that because we become enslaved again to our passions. He releases us from that so we can breathe again, right? Sins are gone. God is with us. We are His people. We want to talk about this idea. We'll see in today's chapter that the idea of the Sabbath kind of punctuates their life. Not only are they going to have a Sabbath every week, but they're going to have various Sabbaths of sorts throughout the year as God gives them rest. And some of the things that you're going to see today that He gives them through this rest, and it's not just ceasing from labor, it's the fact that He would give them, take a guess what they would do for some of these feasts. Some of them would be done at the sanctuary, and what kind of things did God give to them? What commodities did He give them at the sanctuary? What kind of things did He deliver to them? Any thoughts? Say that again?
Things for sacrifice.
Okay, flip it around though. What did He give them through the sacrifices? He gave them forgiveness. In other words, He gave them holy meals. They didn't often eat also meat in their homes, but they ate it at the sanctuary. So they would have times where they would have food, bread, wine, and meat. Therefore, what do you associate with those times of eating? Will you, like next Monday, not this Monday, the following Monday, where you pull out the old Weber grill, right? Barbecue. And what do you associate? You put your shorts on and that ugly shirt that you only wear on Memorial Day, right? That's red, white, and blue. I've got one at least. I've had it for like 15 years, and I only wear it like once a year on Memorial Day, right? Every dad has to have a shirt like that, right? Oh, there's Dad on Memorial Day, But what do you associate with those days? They're times of rest and celebration. Fellowship, yeah? What was that?
Beer.
Yeah, beer too, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they would have the wine too. Times of, I'm going to use the word joy, enjoyment. A life of a slave is a life of what? A life under God and His kingdom. Life is work. God's work that He gives us is good. But it's not all about that. It's also about things like what? Like we're doing here. He gives us fellowship. And He feeds us at His table. And He pours to us the wine of heaven. And He puts to rest our sins. And He grants us atonement through His Son. We are welcomed. Really, you have to understand the temple as God's hearth and home. This is the fire of His kitchen. This is the place where He sits. And He welcomes them to what? Dine at the table of what? The King. Imagine the king in the Bible, you sometimes see this, where the king invites everyone in a season of joy to do what? To come to the capital city where he feeds them from the largesse of what he has. And the idea was that their lives weren't merely punctuated by what? But also joy. But you know, the problem is in our lives, we go back to slavery, don't we? You can take the slave out of Egypt, but it's hard to take the slave out of the Israelite. And the purpose of the Ten Commandments wasn't really about a God who was telling his people, do this and don't do that. The Ten Commandments were really for God's people so that they didn't go back to what? Slavery. They were in jeopardy of a greater slavery, not to the Egyptians, but to things like what? False gods, their own passions. But what would those things do? Those things only require servitude, right? And in our lives, we also go back to this life. We forget that we are a what? Free people. We forget what God has done for us by the cross. And so constantly God wants to, through these feasts, bring us back to recognize who we are, whose we are, and to bring us to his table and to see our unique status as his royal servants. So there's that. The other thing I want to say about the Sabbath, that it's very important, because the Sabbath day was already there in the Garden of Eden, is that there's a few things I like to say. Somebody only pointed this out to me this year. Understanding that Adam and Eve were made on what day in the Garden of Eden? 6. Their first day before God was a day not of work, but what? I never noticed that before. Isn't that cool? Right? I mean, that God says they're just made, and instead of saying, why don't you get out there and do some work, Adam? He says what? Well, now that you're just made, why don't you just sit down and take a break? Right? Isn't that wonderful? That their life began before God with rest. And part of the understanding of the Sabbath day is this picture of creation, that for much of our lives, 6 days of our life, there is the labor, but we're looking forward also to that day of rest. As the Sabbaths punctuated, and sometimes there were longer Sabbaths or 7-day celebrations of Sabbaths, we recognize that there is a rest for the people of God, what Hebrews says, right? We're waiting for our promised what? Rest, where all of our work will be what? Done. Hidden in the Sabbath promise is this understanding that there will be a rest for the people of God, and one day we will put our work aside forever. The other point about the Sabbath day, which is really important, is to recognize that before God, their day was about rest, not doing something to please God or doing something for God. The Sabbath was a gift to them. Different than paganism, different than idolatry, different than servitude. God says, let me serve you. So I always often say that the Sabbath day is a testament to justification by grace through faith, because God says what? Don't do anything. Let me what? Let me serve you. Okay, we're going to weave all these themes together. There's another theme that you're going to see in this long chapter. The other theme is home and sanctuary. I really liked this theme. There's about 8 things that he commands them, 8 things about their time that we're going to see that he commands them. Do all of them happen at the sanctuary? Or maybe put it a better way, these things happen at the sanctuary, but do they always have to attend the sanctuary in each of these situations? Like the Sabbath day, every 7 days, do they have to go wherever they are in the Holy Land all the way back to the temple? No, it would be impossible. So some of the feasts are feasts where they do what? They go and they travel to what? The temple. And some of the feasts are where they gather around their table at home. It seems simple, but I think it's a profound point that our life before God isn't just about what happens, what? Here on Sunday. It's connected to that. But home and hearth and church are connected together. Put another way, the place of God's revealing, the place where he blesses his people, isn't just what? The place where he gives them rest isn't just the sanctuary, it's also what? The home. Also the home. So we'll see that both are sacred places where God with his word gives his people rest from their labor and reminds them of their free status as people of God. All right, another mark of this chapter, I always like the titles of the chapter. Could someone just tell me, reading 23 verse 1 and 2, you don't have to necessarily read it, but tell me, each chapter is interesting because it's written by God to a particular people. So who is it spoken to, this chapter? Okay, the Lord spoke to what? Okay, but he says, speak to what? The people of Israel, and say to them. Why is that interesting? A lot of times we see in these chapters, God says to Moses, speak to the what? Priests. But here, this is God's gift to the what? The people. This legislation, the priests serve them, the people, in order to bring about the days of their rest. So the focus is on the people, even as God aims also to give you rest. Maybe another theme we're going to see here is two things tied together. You know how the Creed has 3 articles? The first article is on creation. I believe that God what? I believe in God the Father Almighty, what? Maker. So we have the article of creation. And under that article we have things like our daily bread, and we have things like our work and our labor and our children and all the physical necessities that we have in life. But the second article is about the article of what? Redemption. Jesus Christ, who did what for us? Died for the cross, rose from the dead on the third day, so on and so forth. These two articles we'll see are intertwined here in that we will see that the daily life of their agricultural way of life was mixed and matched also with the redemption as well. We'll see if we can tease that out, but basically God gives us both. He gives us gifts in the first article, and he gives us gifts in the second article as well. We need things like what? A car to drive in. We need things like food to eat. We need things like the rain to come at the right time. And these days celebrated how God blessed them in the promised land with those things. Sometimes we think God doesn't care about those things. He only cares about the other things. But no, God gives us all these gifts as well. But what good are the gifts of creation without the gifts of redemption? And he also gave them the spiritual necessities that they need. All right? Before I go on with giving you an outline of the chapter, I'm just going to open it up to any comments or questions that you might have before we go on. And I guess I want you to start thinking about, how is my time ordered by the Lord, and where is it that my times aren't just merely day in and day out, but God gives me rest and blessing to show me that I'm his free child? How does this play out in the New Testament? And also, maybe in my life, where are my idolatries? Where are the ways in which my life has become just day in and day out, one thing after the other? I've mentioned this in a few sermons before, but the pagan understanding of time is the merry-go-round that you can't get off of, right? Every child loves merry-go-rounds, but keep on spinning them, and after a while they will say, "Dad," right? "Get me off of this thing." In the pagan understanding of time, you're just going around in the circle. It's one thing after the other, and our lives become like that, torturous labor. God endeavors our lives not to be like that, but we might consider, what are those ways in which I'm serving false idols that are demanding things of me in the end that leave me with no rest? And where do I need to come back to my full status as a child of God, recognizing what Jesus said? Remember, Sabbath day is about rest. What's the most famous verse that Jesus says about rest? "Come to me, all you who are" what? "Labor and are heavy, and I will give you," take my yoke upon you. For my yoke is what? Easy, and my burden is light, and you will find what for your souls? Rest. That Jesus ultimately is the one who comes not to demand, but to give. Okay, I want you to think about these things as they ruminate in your mind and heart. Anything before I tell you the 7 things, there might be 8, but I think there's 7. That would be fitting. 7 things in this chapter of holy time that mark their liturgical year. Anything before we go on? I'm going to write this on the board because I can, right? All right. All right, we'll see if we can write this on the board. We're going to see here, number 1, we're going to see everything starts off with the Sabbath, right? Okay? That's the first thing that God mentions, the Sabbath, and that would happen every week. And the Sabbath is called, what do we say? Maybe say the third commandment with me. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it what? Holy. The Sabbath is we would say a holy day. And by a holy day, we mean a day, that word holy, it's not yours, it's what? God's. It's not for your purposes, it's the purposes for which God has instituted it. So some of the days are yours, Jewish people, but some of the days are what? God's. And so we see that this day is a holy day. And let me ask you this question. I asked it before, but reiterate. For the Jew, did the Sabbath day, did they go to the sanctuary for the Sabbath day? Yes or no? No, they didn't. So this is a day that would be celebrated in their what? Homes. You know, in later Jewish history, they had the synagogue, and I'm sure they did various things at home with a reading of God's word and such, but nonetheless, this was a day where they set aside their labor and for holy things. The second thing we'll see is the unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We know this better by a different name, but the name we know it by is just a part of this feast. So this would be a weekly festival, one day of a week. The Feast of Unleavened Bread would happen how many times a year? Anybody? One time a year. And how long did it last? Any ideas? It was a whole week. Okay? So it was a whole week. Now each day of the feast was different and their obligations were different. However, what do we know? What do we know about the Feast of Unleavened Bread? What do we call it by a little bit that we know it better by? Okay, so part of this week is the sacrifice of the lamb, where the Passover lamb is celebrated, okay, or sacrificed, I should say. Now, I've got to get this right because this is a kind of an interesting point I learned this week. But the Passover was celebrated, okay. Okay. I don't know if I can explain this, but I'm going to try to. The Passover happened on the 14th of Nisan. Okay, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread really started on the 15th of Nisan, and it would go for a week. And I'll get to a point here in a second, but I'll say that they only had to stay the first day. So the feast, really, the Passover is slaughtered on or taken on the 14th of Nisan. The 15th starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and they were only required to be at the sanctuary. This is a pilgrim festival, one of the 2 that's listed in the chapter, where they would go to the sanctuary for this. Now, they were only required to stay there for a day. So after they celebrated the Passover and they had the first day of unleavened bread, the feast did go for a whole week, but the main part of it was at the beginning of the week and the Sabbath that closed the week. Therefore, some of this could be celebrated also at home. Now, just set that aside for a second. The interesting thing is, on the 16th day of Nisan, the third thing is mentioned. And I think I'm spelling Nisan wrong. I think it's Nisan. I'm spelling it like the car. I apologize. During this Feast of Unleavened Bread, if you understand their year, now this is something I need to ask some of the people who know more about this than I do. But do you know how in Pennsylvania you have kind of some of you could answer this question, what crop leads from what crop to the next crop, right? So there is an ordering of things that are planted and what ultimately is harvested by the farmers. If I'm noticing this correctly, the first crop of hay has already come in. So in our culture here in Pennsylvania, you've got hay that comes first. And if I'm in my bike rides around, if I'm noticing another crop, I'm noticing right now what I think is called winter wheat. Am I correct?
And barley.
Winter wheat and barley. In Wisconsin, they did it was hard. I called the co-op one time because I said, I'm doing a presentation for my VBS on barley. They said it's really hard to distinguish between the two. But in Wisconsin, all the good barley in the day went down to, any guesses? Milwaukee. Okay? All right. So hay, wheat, and barley. Now, I know in the ancient cultures it's just a little bit different. And let's just simply say that we've got our fruits and vegetables that come after that, but the main kind of thing that's coming after that is in our culture is the corn. That doesn't happen for a long time. Recognize that these feasts are punctuated by different parts of the harvest. And for the Jews, the first crop that came out was not hay, not wheat. The wheat came later. The first crop was what? It was barley. And that was a poor man's bread, but it was the first bread. And so what would take place is this. On the 16th of Nisan, they had the first sheaf in the temple. The first sheaf was presented and elevated. And only after, it was done by the high priest, only after it could they eat their grain. This is fascinating to me. So you can't eat your grain until the priest first blesses the first what? Sheaf. And any time there's a liturgical action, they call this the wave offering. It kind of, my kids say it's like, the ballpark. It's like, no, it wasn't like that, right? It wasn't that kind of wave. It was the priest, I read the liturgical action would be that he extended it. I read that he extended it out from his body. Now, the recognition is that in many of these wave offerings or presentation offerings, there's another name for it. It's not just, if it comes to you, tell me. But in this offering, the offering usually isn't sacrificed on the altar. It's offered to God, but then it's what? Received back for the people. So often these wave offerings are ways in which God provides for the priests so that they eat. I don't know if I'll go down that rabbit trail, but this is a beautiful thing that it's both God's and yet God gives it back to what? His people. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating, it's been a long time since I had totally forgotten this point. The understanding of first fruits is what? The first one comes and is presented but what's that a sign of? That's a sign of more to come. I think we often focus in Jesus in Holy Week, we focus well on the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Lord's Supper and the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. But what happens the day after the Passover lamb is celebrated? The Feast of Unleavened Bread starts, with it, which is a day of what? Rest. And then after that day of rest, what happens? The first sheaf is what? Presented. Which is the sign of what? More to come. If you're drawing the comparisons, Jesus died on Good Friday. What did he do on Saturday? He rested on that first day of the unleavened bread. And then the day after that, he is what? Presented, as it were. He is the first what? First fruit, first sheaf. That's offered to God, given back to the people for our joy and celebration, but also the sign that is more to come. You know, if you're reading some of the songs, who are the sheaves? Bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. Who are the sheaves? You are. That Christ was resurrected, and the point is that we are the ones that are wholesome grain, which will be. All right, Nick?
Omer offering.
Say that again.
The Omer offering.
Omer offering? Yeah. And the word wave sometimes they have used different names for it as well.
For the saying, it's showing us things to come, do you need more grain to come, like the blessing, or the work to come that comes in with the harvest? Because the harvest is a lot.
Yeah.
Or both.
You know, I mean, isn't it interesting that, and I'll just play with this a little bit, the disciples are going to go forward in all nations, and they're called to bring in the harvest, which is both joy, but also what? A fair bit of, joyful work. And as the ones who work in the Lord's kingdom, our work is to be punctuated not merely by labor from a master to a slave, but to free people who are joyful in the work that God has given. Great comment there. Thank you. So the first thing that's mentioned in this chapter is the Sabbath. The second thing is this unleavened bread, the week of unleavened bread. Passover is connected to that. Then the first sheaf is presented. After that is the Day of Weeks. I'm going to just put it down here. Weeks. And what's another name for the Feast of Weeks? Anyone? That's Pentecost, because it happens what? 50 days or 7 weeks, is it? It happens 7 weeks. 7 weeks or 50 days after the first sheaf is presented. This is the first day, and then the 50th day, which always falls on a Sunday, is the day of Pentecost. This is confusing, but just recognize before Pentecost was a Christian festival, it was a what? We'll get to that in a second. And then let's go up here to number 5. The fifth thing that's mentioned in holy time is the day of acclamation. Okay? Any trumpet players here? Right? This would be on the 7th month. There would be a special trumpet usually. That day was acclaimed as being the holiest month of the year. So our holiest month of the year is certainly Easter. On the first part of this month, the trumpet is sounded, and it is a day of rest as well. So God gives kind of bonus days. Don't you love that? Like the bonus days, like you get Sunday off from your workplace, but then all of a sudden it's Memorial Day and you get a long weekend. So that's kind of the idea here. And then the sixth thing and the 7th day come in this month. So these all happen in the 7th month, okay? The 6th thing is the day, we call it the Day of Atonement. And this is the most holiest day of the year where they lay their sins and the sin of the goat. God gives them forgiveness and atonement for all their sins. And however, it ends in this same month, and I didn't know this either, with the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. I mean, I knew about this festival, but I didn't know that it was celebrated on the 7th month. This is like the holiest of months. And this was a feast, their most joyful feast of the year. So let me ask, I kind of put it in perspective. This the Tabernacles is when all the harvest is kind of come in already. When you would have the barley crop, there was still a lot of work to do, right? The first sheaf is offered, but you got to go home and do the harvest, and the wheat crop is coming, and you're busy with that, and all that labor. But the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles is when the harvest is completely what? It's completely finished. Their time is ordered by these things, and each thing has its referent at what something in their history, like Passover lamb was how they got out of what? Egypt. The unleavened bread was to remind them of what? To maybe 2 or 3 things. What does the unleavened bread remind his people of? What event in their history? Any thoughts? It reminds them of the Exodus. They didn't even have their time for their bread to what? Rise. Their deliverance happened very quickly. And I like to think that the unleavened bread would also possibly remind them of how God fed them in the wilderness with bread as well. How about the Feast of Weeks? So the point is this is an Exodus. This is the story of Exodus. The weeks is the story of Sinai. What did God give to them? What did he give to them at Sinai? He gave them his what? His word. He gave them his law. And his law was not meant, again, it was meant as gift to save them from slavery to false gods that didn't save. How about this? The Day of Atonement. I read that this week. The Day of Atonement was to connect them to what grave incident in the wilderness that had happened, almost right at the gate. Almost right at the gate. What do we see the Israelites doing that would need atonement and would cause God's presence to leave his people unless atonement was made? The sacrifice of the golden what? The golden calf. So the Day of Atonement reminded them, of the great sins of God's people. How about booths and tabernacles? This is an interesting holiday. It's an interesting holiday. What did they do during the Feast of Booths? I've talked about this before, but I might add a little bit. To this. What do they do on the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles? Please.
They traveled from wherever they were.
Okay, it was pilgrim. One of the 2 pilgrim festivals here. Thank you. So it's in the tabernacle. They travel. Yeah?
And they built tent-like structures, sometimes out of corn stalks or whatever, that their family could live in while they stayed to celebrate Thanksgiving to God for all the harvest.
Yeah, excellent. So it was the feast of the greatest joy, and they celebrated the completion of the harvest, right? They celebrated all that God had given them, and it reminded them of how God... Did they live in tents anymore? They lived in permanent dwellings. So if booths reminds them of anything, it reminds them of what? God brought them to the what? He finally brought them to the promised land. They're finally what? Free and home at last. Yes, and one of the neat things too that I see in the New Testament, they would also take these leafy branches, of which there could be 3 or 4 varieties, and they, in procession of great joy, would bring those branches and into the temple, and they would process with these branches as well. And this is why in the book of Revelation, when John looks into heaven, what does he see? He sees them celebrating the feast of what? I see palm branches in their hands because God has brought them what? He's brought them home. This is our life. This is the how our time is punctuated by these Sabbath days of different types. You know, Jesus' cross, right? The Passover lamb, the great sins that we have, the need for atonement, the giving of his word and law. We celebrate on the day of our day of Pentecost, the giving of the Holy Spirit and the preaching of the apostles. But it's all leading to what? The Feast of Booths and Tabernacles, the feast where the harvest will be what? Will be in. You know, if you think I'm a little bit, going off the deep end with some of this stuff, this is just what you sing every year on Thanksgiving. I'm going to read to you a hymn that has nothing to do with Thanksgiving, but we sing it every Thanksgiving. And what hymn is that? Come ye thankful people, come. Raise the song of harvest home. Is it talking about corn, wheat? Not really. All be safely gathered in ere the winter storms begin. God our Maker doth provide for our wants to be supplied. Come to God's own temple, come. Raise the song of harvest home. So there is a bit of harvest there, but it links it to not just first article, but second article. All the world is God's own field, fruit unto his praise to yield. Well, what are we meant for? We're meant to be sheaves that what? To be his free people, to give praise to him, right? Wheat and tares together sown, unto joy or sorrow grown. There's a field, right? There's weeds and there's wheat. First the blade, and then the ear. Then the full corn shall appear. Lord of harvest, grant that we wholesome grain and pure may be. For the Lord our God shall come and shall take his harvest home. From his field shall in that day all offenses purge away. Give his angels charge at last in the fire the tares to cast, but the fruitful ears to store in his garner evermore. Even so, Lord, quickly come to thy final harvest home. Gather thou thy people in, free from sorrow, free from sin. There forever purified in thy garner to abide. Come with all thine angels, come, raise the song, the glorious harvest home. So the whole point here is that this is where we're headed. Farley?
I was just going to say, the German churches around here, the country churches especially, and we've been talking about it once in a while. Harvest Home was the big celebration of the year. At the Lutheran and what's now UCT, there'd be corn shocks, all kinds of canned fruit, pumpkins, anything you can think of was in the chancel area. The whole church was decorated. It was called Harvest Home.
Huh.
And we've lost that in the last, it started turning over to canned goods,
Yeah.
from the store. But there'd be shocks of wheat, anything you can think of, soybeans, they'd all be decorated.
Yeah, and the biblical understanding of this is not just first article, it's also what? It's also second article that the Lord will bring us harvest home as well.
And I think
Yeah.
you said when your father did it,
We used to have that once a year somewhere, either the beginning of October or the end of September. And we'd always sing that Come Ye Thankful People Come that Sunday, and also Thanksgiving. People would bring in some crops. There were canned goods. A lot of women did canning in those days. There were meats that were preserved. And then Dad would gather those together, put them in, we had an old 1940 DeSoto car that you could live in the trunk and you could live in the back seat. And we would take those from Cunningham, Pennsylvania, down to Allentown, the Lutheran Children's Home, all those goodies and all those foods. And it was a nice Sunday. It really was. It was a nice Sunday in the fall.
Yeah, that's beautiful. As our societies move away from, agrarian kind of commerce, then these things ultimately change and a lot is lost as we lose our tie to the land. Beautiful, Dick. Thank you.
that was the real Thanksgiving.
That was the real thing. So it wasn't on Thanksgiving, is what you're saying?
This was the Thanksgiving. It was the German tradition.
Yeah.
And Thanksgiving
We'd
was a
celebrate
blessing.
both up in the coal region. We'd have Harvest Home, and we also would have Thanksgiving.
Interesting.
Thanksgiving was always Thanksgiving morning. And then after that, we'd head in the car and go down to Philadelphia, my mother's place.
That's interesting. Okay, yeah, please.
You've been skipping over number 5 and it's driving me nuts.
Okay,
You said trumpet.
okay,
You said that, Handel's Messiah's in my head.
yeah.
You know, you mentioned rest associated with the trumpet.
Okay,
And, you know, the trumpet shall sound and
Okay.
the dead shall be raised.
yeah. So
Go home.
I want to read, let's read a few things about trumpets on the Day of Acclamation. Go to Psalm 47 to talk about trumpets, and we're going to just talk about trumpets a little bit. Psalm 47, 5-7 says this. Well, we'll start off with 47. Could someone read starting at verse 1 and going through verse 7?
Clap your hands, all people. Shout to God with loud songs of joy. The Lord the Most High is terrible, a great king over all the earth. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. He chose our heritage for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loves. God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Sing praises to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises with us all.
Okay, so one of the things, go to Psalm 98. Nick, go to Psalm 98, verse 6, if you'd read that as well.
With trumpets and the sound of the horn, make a joyful noise before the King, the Lord.
Okay, we see before that, sing praises to the Lord with the lyre and the sound of melody. I could go into a whole, I could have a conversation with you about David and the lyre and the psalter and how they were conducted in the temple. However, one of the interesting things that I found is that in the temple, the trumpet is the mark of theophany. So, trumpet is the mark of God's presence coming for his people. It's in the Old Testament. When the trumpet was played in the temple, it signaled to the people to bow down because God was coming to rescue and deliver them. The shofar is what we're talking about there. But, so the trumpet are always things, it signals, right? The king is coming. The king has arrived. He's going out to, fight his battles. He's coming in order to bless his people. So king and trumpet go together in the scriptures. I don't know if that really helps, but what is the king ultimately on the Day of Acclamation coming to do? And I've got my numbers all messed up here. I apologize. But what is the king coming to do? He's coming to bless his people, to forgive their sins, and to ultimately bring them into harvest. So we have in the 7th month here, I'm forgetting how many months they had. I think they had 12, but I'm not quite sure about how many months they had. Barb, do you remember? How many months did you... I forget all the months they had and the names of the month.
It blows my mind because the timing is so different because it's all based on the moon.
It's based on the moon, the month. Yeah, exactly. So it's a little bit different. Suffice it, and this maybe before we maybe conclude here, what time do we have?
35.
Oh, okay. That clock, I'm going by that clock. So you're just going to have to set that clock forward next week. You read the chapter yourself, but ultimately, what did God's people do with all these feasts? I mean, that's a sad thing, isn't it? God gave them all these feasts where he would come and bless them and sanctify them, and through the smoke of the offering, give them acceptance and assure them of his pardon and favor, feed them from his table, forgive their sins. But what's the history of God's people? It's really a jettisoning of what? These Sabbaths and holy Sabbath rests that he gave his people. So that's something to think of too, that he gave them the gift, but the gift wasn't, as it were, received. And maybe it's meant to think about, how does God give me rest, and where are the ways in which, I don't receive the rest that he's given. Aaron, did you have anything?
I think that really helps. I was puzzled for a moment about what happened in Mark chapter 2, where the Pharisees are upset with Jesus' disciples for eating
Yeah.
Right
Okay.
off the stop like that.
Yeah.
And Jesus says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Okay. So what Aaron's getting at is a whole conversation we could have, which would be titled Sabbath Controversies. And what did they do with the Sabbath? Ultimately, they made it more of a burden than a day of rest. And Jesus was there to give it back. So sometimes there would be people on the Sabbath day that would be sick in the midst, and he would want to heal them, but they sought an opportunity to put him to death because they didn't want him to do work on the Sabbath. But his point was, this is the point of the Sabbath, to grant physical rest and spiritual rest. What a better day to do it than Sunday. He also used those controversies to show how they had these rules that they could help their donkey out of the pit if it fell on the Sabbath day, but they showed more mercy to their donkey than they did to their brother and sister in the Lord. In another way, too, when they ate on the Sabbath or certain things were done on the Sabbath, Jesus said, about the Father always works on the Sabbath as well. Do you know what I mean by that? So the priests are interesting. They don't really get a day of rest in the same way because they are always working. And Jesus, by working on the Sabbath, also showed his divinity, that he was Lord over the Sabbath, as he uses that term, that he is true God because God always works. He always serves his people. So one of the things that you bring forward is we could really look at, especially in the Gospel of John, how Jesus goes to these feasts, how he interplays. Even like the Feast of Booths was known for water and light. It's the very time that Jesus says, I am the what of the world, the light of the world. And he talks about the water that flows from his side. So he works on these themes to show himself as the true rest and fulfillment of it. But Jesus went to the Passover when he was 12. He also, his last Passover was there, at 33 years of age. But he showed himself as a faithful Jew, participating in these feast days and showing how they picture and culminate in the rest that he gives to his people. Okay? Your life isn't just about work. Anything else? Your life isn't just about work. You're free people, right? Rescued by the forgiveness of sins and the Passover that God had for you. You come to the day of Pentecost, the day where God reveals his word to you. You have the days of atonement where your sins are forgiven. All these things are made because you, like the Jewish people, constantly go back to what? Egypt. What do they say? Whenever they went through a controversy, what did they say? Oh, we had it so great in Egypt. The food was so good, right? Not forgetting that they were what? You're a free people. You're free people of the Lord. And recognize that freedom is marked by the rest that God gives you, that you see that your life is not one day after another, but a line, a history, a continuum. You're going somewhere. You're going to the feast of what? You're going to the Feast of Booths, where what? Palm branches in your hand. It reminds one last story there on the Feast of Transfiguration. What does Peter say? Lord, can we set up 3 what? Booths, yeah. Set up 3 booths. Jesus says we're not to the Feast of Booths yet. We have to go to the Feast of the Passover first. So we're not quite there yet, but that's where we're going. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen.